Welcome to the Fourthstream podcast, where we are dedicated to finding hope. You can count on us to do our research and invite you into a dynamic learning process of authenticity. You can find lots of hopeful resources at fourthstream.com.
There are so many caring people that I have met over the years, and I just really appreciate that kind of compassion and dedication to kindness that it comes out of the human spirit, but it really is a gift from God. It's kind of the nature of who God is. He's imparted so many things to us when He made us in His image. And today, I want to talk about how that kindness expresses itself in intercession for people. And I know that's really a religious sounding word, excuse me, but what it means, what interceding means, and I get out of your mind the picture of like a leader, a priest, or a pastor, or whatever. That's included in the idea, but really interceding doesn't just happen with spiritual leaders. Or maybe interceding is part of what makes a spiritual leader, whatever that looks like. But intercession means to stand between someone and another, or a difficulty they're experiencing. And it's kind of like the word advocacy. We don't use that a lot anymore, but an advocate would be like somebody who would argue your case before a judge. So we become an advocate when we choose to support or plead another's case. Particularly before an ultimate judge, or the ultimate judge in this case, like we're talking about a little bit today. So that picture, I don't know what you have in your mind when you think about intercession, but maybe some of these things that we're going to talk about here briefly will be helpful with that. Advocacy is based upon higher principles of justice and kindness. You can't be someone's advocate if you are not pursuing justice and if you're not pursuing kindness. So it's a higher principle of justice and kindness, and it's also implicit in it is a caring commitment through what is true. And so when something is true in the pursuit of truth, which this is a crazy idea, especially in the world that we're living in, because everything's relative, right? But intercession acts mercifully on what is true, okay? So intercession sees something and then it acts with mercy. It asks and answers the question, what can I do? This is why maybe you send money overseas every month to kids or to a family, or maybe you're involved in digging wells where around the world where people don't have it. All those different kinds of things are based upon mercy. So intercession and mercy are so closely tied together. So that's a good principle to think about when you think about intercession. It's also not only based on what is true, but it includes the sufferer themselves, whoever is experiencing the pain, the observer, the one who watches, and then the other spiritual beings, because we're not alone in the universe. There are other things going on, and intercession brings sufferer and observer and spiritual beings, and this I would include God, because obviously God understands suffering. Just check out Jesus and Jesus' story. So advocacy, intercession, they seem to go hand in hand. So in the spiritual realm, this may express itself through specific intercession. So intercession, where one person rises to request intervention from God on another's behalf. Now that's what I'm talking about, okay? I'm talking about making intercession. Now I can intercede by doing different things, but these are the kinds of things where you go to the source. You go to the one who can actually do something about anything. Think about that. So one person rises up in intercession to request intervention from God on another's behalf for the purpose of help or justice or needed support. And often this gets our attention because it happens during intense adversity. We see somebody suffering, or we are suffering, or somebody sees us suffering. And with that notable suffering or potential victory that happens. That's why we weep with those who weep. We also rejoice with those who rejoice. Intercession just isn't trying to, come alongside of people and say, oh, woe is me, please deliver us. It's also like, well, look what's happened. I can rejoice with another person's success or the good things that happen in their lives. So, here are some possible human responses when we see deep needs. So I'm trying to make the connection here between who I am, the needs I see, what I want to do about those needs, and then what God can do about those needs. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just trying to do the best I can here because this is a big subject. But here are some possible human responses to the deep needs of others. Inquire. You got to be aware, right? You got to be willing to ask questions. So you see that look on somebody's face, or about something that just happened. I've been around a lot of suffering people in pretty intense situations. And so I need to ask what I need to ask, but then there are things I don't need to ask. So you do the right kind of inquiry, right? And then you process it and go, okay, what do I have to help in this situation? And then I determine any course of action when I become aware of another person's needs rather than remaining obtuse or just ignoring, which sadly that's so deeply in human DNA, is to ignore what goes on around us because we don't want to get involved. So we also, in those human responses, we can engage with words and actions. So we inquire, we become aware, and then we can engage with words and actions, and particularly as God speaks within a person's conscience, because our conscience is that's where it happens. That's where our heart and emotions and our body and our soul, everything comes together in our conscience, because God has made us conscious beings. And so we engage with words and actions as God speaks within our conscience, and that's what pushes us into intercession. I don't know if that makes sense, but something to wrestle with and to think about. Here are some tips that I found for being helpful through intercession, being helpful to other people, or even interceding for myself, which we'll talk about in a second. There is somebody interceding for us when we don't even know what to intercede for ourselves. But here are some tips about intercession. First of all, resolve to live on a deeper and caring level. Don't be shallow. If you can choose to be a person of substance and a person of depth, then you probably will be drawn to help people on a fundamental level. Second of all, be aware. Ask good questions and listen well. It's one thing to have all the answers. It's totally another to be able to listen and draw people out and really understand what is happening in somebody's life. Third of all, connect with someone, and I have that capitalized on your slide here. Connect with someone who can do things beyond what you are able to supply. Because it's great for me to be able to give that cup of cold water or to come alongside and put those warm clothes on somebody. And I think that's huge, because I think we're doing the work of God when we do that. But there are things inside of people that far transcend the things on the outside. And those are the things that God is ultimately interested in. And finally, when it comes to intercession, become familiar with principles of intercession, which may produce help or relief to someone's suffering on a physical level, but also on a core emotional heart, and then maybe even deeper, a spiritual level. Because intercession is, it's just really one of the greatest kindnesses that we can do for people around us. So it's good to engage in intercession. Personal comfort and tragedy come alongside. It took me years to learn that just to keep my mouth shut, you just go in when somebody is suffering. Sometimes there's nothing that can be said. No platitudes. No, everything's going to be all right. It's just a matter of, if there's tragedy, I am here. I come alongside of you. It's also good to engage, and then you can pray for somebody as you watch what goes on. It's also good in intercession to see another's need to encounter God and find freedom. And that's what I often do when I see people that are suffering or are wrestling with something, is ask God, what is it that I can intercede for? Because they're fighting their own fight. What can I do to come alongside to help them? It's also good to engage in intercession with pressing personal needs, which are apparent or not so obvious. So as things happen and people's needs become apparent and they press upon them, that's a good word for me, because you can feel pressing when it happens. It's like that almost shortness of breath or that tightness in your chest. When you sense that happening on whatever emotional level, that's an indicator that there might be a place and an opportunity for you to intercede for somebody. Growth issues also are a part of intercession, and they require a deeper level of prayer. I mean, you see somebody, you see their behavior, you see what's happening. You might see, an out of control 7-year-old, and you go, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen when they get to where they're 12 and their schoolmates can't stand to see them because they're such brats?" Well, maybe instead of just sitting there and looking down my nose at somebody, I can actually pray and ask for God to help them in that particular area of growth in their personal life. And then finally, apparent blind spots. A lot of people, we all have blind spots. What can you do about it? You like to think that you're the most well-rounded person in the world, but that's not necessarily true. And that's why we need each other. We lift up each other in our blind spots, and then we benefit one another with the strengths that we have. Now this slide has a bunch of references on it, and I wanted you to have it just because they're great examples from the God story and intercession. I'm just going to go through them really quickly and just talk about them. I'm not going to read them, but in Job 42, after Job goes through all of his suffering, he prays for his friends. And when he prays for his friends, they are restored, and he is restored as well. So that's one of the things the God story says about intercession. It's really easy when somebody wrongs you to write them off. And that's why Jesus says things like, love your enemies and bless those who persecute you. So forgiveness and prayer, intercession are so big related to restoration. Second passage here that I love is in Numbers 16. And Moses has some people complaining, belly aching about him as a leader. And they were not doing it kindly, and they were not doing it in God. And when I read this story in Numbers 16, I want to say, well, let them experience the wrath of their anger and the wrath of their pride. But that's not what Moses does. Moses falls on his face, and he begins to intercede for the people who are cursing him. And you think about that. Forgiveness out of Job, and then humility of falling on your face to intercede. It's a very powerful example of intercession in the Bible. Psalm 51 is a beautiful psalm. You might want to get familiar with it if you are not in your life. It talks about the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit and a contrite or a humbled heart. So intercession doesn't just have to do with our actions. It has a lot to do with what's going on inside of our hearts. Matthew 5, verses 43 through 48, talks about placing justice in God's hands. Don't take your own vengeance. Vengeance belongs to God. God's going to make everything right. In fact, God is able to keep track of everything. Right now, while you're listening to me, every atom, every molecule in this universe is being held together by the power of God. Think about that. Think about what you know about that related to science. And finally, in James 5, when it comes to intercession, we're supposed to pray for one another, pray for healing for one another. And that just reminds me of when Jesus was dying on the cross, one of the last earthly things he said was, "Forgive them, Father. Forgive them, Father, because they don't know what they do." So that's a little bit of a picture. If you want to look more at the idea of intercession in a very personal and intimate way, go over to John 17, because it's the most intimate account that we have of Jesus and his Father and what they shared between each other. And it's called the intercessory prayer. It's deep. You can't just look at it and go, oh, I get it. But when you look at it, you might get a little bit of a feeling of why God sent Jesus to intercede for us, and why Jesus right now is at the Father's right hand by his throne, and he is always living to make intercession for you and for me. And that is beautiful, my friend.
Thanks for listening to our podcast. You can find posts and podcasts on tons of subjects at fourthstream.com, along with encouraging music which can be shared by a variety of ages. Finding hope at fourthstream.com.